Some choices stick with you forever. You pick a lane, and before you know it, the lane becomes a highway with no exits. For nations, it's the same, only the stakes are enormous and the timelines stretch for centuries. The moment a country is born or reborn after a war, it chooses a survival strategy. Agriculture, industry, technology, whatever fits the moment. But once that choice is taken, it's like a lock is closing. And here's the catch. It almost never reopens. Think about it. Argentina became rich exporting beef. South Korea rebuilt itself into an electronics hub. Estonia jumped straight into the internet age. 3 totally different stories, but all locked in by the timing of their birth. Because once a country invests in a path, its schools, its politics, its money, everything begins pointing the same way. To turn around means dismantling what already works. And who wants to blow up a system that still pays the bills? That's the quiet force shaping history. Path dependency, a concept that says that when a society makes a big choice, that choice tends to shape and constrain later options. It is similar to what economists call lock-in, when referring to the technologies, the notion that when one option becomes dominant, switching away becomes too costly, too inconvenient, or too entrenched, even if better alternatives exist. Let's see how it works in practice, starting with Britain. In the 1700s, Britain's economy wasn't obviously destined for greatness. France had more land, Spain had more silver, and China had more people. But Britain had coal, and more importantly, it had a political and legal system that rewarded entrepreneurs instead of strangling them. When the first textile mills fired up in Manchester, they didn't just produce cloth, they produced momentum. Britain's leaders doubled down on canals, railroads, and factories. And soon, their economy wasn't just about farming anymore, it was industrial to the bone. That first choice created a machine that kept repeating itself generation after generation. Now, why didn't countries like Spain, Portugal, or even the Ottoman Empire make the same leap at the same time? Spain had been the richest empire in Europe, but its first big choice was different. Instead of investing in factories, it invested in silver and colonies. Money poured into Madrid, but it was spent on palaces and armies instead of railways. By the time Spain tried to industrialize, Britain already controlled the seas and the markets. Spain's first step had locked it into empire, not industry. The Ottoman Empire faced something similar. Their wealth came from controlling trade routes, not from reinventing how goods were made. Their institutions reinforced military dominance and tax farming rather than factories and machines. By the time the Industrial Revolution spread, the Ottomans were locked into defending territory, not building steam engines. In both these countries, the elites who made money from the system already in place had no interest in diverging the nation's budget into something else. And this is a major reason for path dependency everywhere. Let's fast forward to the 1800s. Latin America is full of new nations breaking free from European empires. What did they see when they looked at the world? Fertile land, endless cattle, mountains of coffee and silver. Europe, meanwhile, was industrializing like crazy, but it still needed food and raw materials. Argentina leaned into its strength, beef. Its vast pampas became the pasture for an empire. And when refrigerated ships arrived in the late 1800s, Buenos Aires could feed London almost as easily as a local farm could. The money was absurd. Landowners became political dynasties. Why gamble on factories when cows kept the profits flowing? That's the first trap of path dependency. The winners of the first choice fight hardest to keep it in place. But if a nation's path is so sticky, what about countries that do try to change? Are revolutions, reforms, and wars enough to reset the path? The evidence suggests it is not. Russia, after 1917, swapped monarchs for communists. But instead of wiping the slate clean, the Soviet Union inherited deep patterns: centralized control, suspicion of outsiders, reliance on vast resources. It looked new, but a change in government didn't really change the economic base. Japan is another story. After centuries of isolation, it industrialized with lightning speed in the 19th century. But again, it wasn't starting from zero. It built on a highly organized, hierarchical society that already valued discipline and efficiency. Japan didn't escape its past, it turbocharged it. And that's the paradox of path dependency. Even when countries seem to reinvent themselves, they're usually just reshaping old molds, not breaking free. In the 20th century, a different wave of independence swept through Asia and Africa. But the timing had shifted. By then, the ticket to modernity wasn't coffee or cattle. It was steel plants, railways, hydroelectric dams, the heavy symbols of industrial progress. Take India. When independence came in 1947, leaders wanted to shake off the old role of supplying raw cotton and tea for someone else's factories. Nehru's government launched giant 5-year plans, build steel plants, dams, and industries that shouted self-reliant. And for a while it worked. India made its own goods. But heavy industry is hard to upgrade. Despite that initial leap, years later the underlying structure of the economy was still shaped by choices made back in the 1950s. Even decades later, when India's IT sector boomed, the skeleton of its economy was still shaped by those early industrial choices, with inefficiencies and slow-moving bureaucracy embedded. That's the inertia of history. Now imagine South Korea in 1953. The Korean War had just ended. Cities were rubble, poverty was crushing. The country had almost nothing. American aid helped, but leaders knew handouts weren't enough. They needed exports. So they started small, textiles, shoes. Then they leveled up, shipbuilding, cars, semiconductors. Each step building on the last, each generation trained to push harder. By the 1980s, South Korea wasn't just surviving, it was a manufacturing powerhouse. Electronics and high-tech became its brand. Not because it was inevitable, but because every school, every factory, every ministry was pulling in that direction. Then there's Estonia. Independence came in 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The country was poor, its infrastructure outdated. But the internet was just about to take off. Instead of trying to catch up on 1970s-style industries, Estonia jumped forward. Government services went online. Citizens got digital IDs. Kids learned programming in school. You could open a company from your laptop in minutes. Estonia didn't just build a tech sector, it built itself into a digital platform. And once you have that kind of identity, you don't pivot back to steel mills. You double down on what makes you different. So why do nations stay locked in? 3 big reasons. The skills and infrastructure are built for that path. The people in power profit from keeping it. The old system still pays the bills. Switching means running one economy to survive while building another from scratch. That's not just risky, it's political suicide. Of course, there are exceptions. Finland moved from timber and paper to tech in the late 20th century, riding Nokia's wave. Japan pivoted from wartime production to consumer goods after World War II. But here's the key, those weren't reinventions. They were evolutions. Finland already had an educated workforce and engineering tradition. Japan already had factories and skilled labor. They didn't abandon their paths, they stretched them. And then there's the US, a rare case of a country that really did switch lanes. As a colony, it inherited Britain's institutions and language, but on a continent with vast resources and no entrenched feudal system. That gave it a strange mix, the benefits of an old path without many of its constraints. When Britain industrialized, America could copy and adapt its methods at record speed. Once independent, the US started with agriculture and plantations, but after the Civil War, the industrial North pulled the country onto a new track before elites were set or a firm path was taken. Add millions of immigrants, plus a dose of luck, and America made the leap. But if America could copy Britain, why couldn't India or Egypt do the same when they were also under British influence? The difference was how much power the UK exerted on each. India's institutions weren't free to choose their path, Britain chose for them. The railways in India weren't built to fuel Indian industry, but to extract resources for British factories. Egypt tried under Muhammad Ali in the early 1800s, pushing for its own industrial base, but European pressure shut it down. Nations without political independence found their first steps redirected, locked into supplying raw goods. The fact that the US wasn't very lucrative for Britain, while Egypt and India were, made all the difference. In the end, you can almost predict a country's future by the moment it was born or reborn. It's not destiny, but it's close. The starting point shapes the next century. And the longer a country walks a road, the harder it is to turn back. Thank you for watching Into the Loop. If you enjoyed this story, lock in.